Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Doesn't matter whatsoever what time of day or night it is. I am still just as glad that you've chosen to stop by my channel. My name is Reverend Paul J. Bern. I am the online pastor of the online church known as the Social Gospel Worship and Learning Center, based in Atlanta, Georgia. For an explanation of the term social gospel, you can visit my business page on Google My Business at Social Gospel Worship and Learning Center. Just search that term and it'll pop right up. Today, for this recording, we're going to do a weekly message, this time having to do with some social justice as it applies to the proposed debt relief for those who are trying unsuccessfully to pay off their student loans. Before I start, let me quickly point out some things for you first-timers. Now, this is a non-brick and mortar church. You'll find no bricks and no mortar here. I don't need to raise money on each and every week for the upkeep of a building. I have no building. Christ didn't have one either. We exist on the web, reaching out to those who wouldn't normally be found in church. Many of them aren't there anymore because of disillusionment. I was at one time one of those people. I've been through all that. Come out intact on the other side. But this is a church without a religious denominational consideration. No denomination is taught here. As I said, it's a virtual church. And we don't, because we don't have a building, I don't ask for people for 10% of their income each week. Although that is in the Bible, it's being taught wrong today. I'll have a message on that ready shortly. But for now, I want to talk about this business about the student loans. The title of this week's message is Walk Away from Your Student Loans Without Filing Bankruptcy. It can be done, but ... Now, we're going to use a chunk of scripture today from back in the Old Testament, from the book of Nehemiah, who was one of the minor prophets of old. This is coming from chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. There's a lot of stuff packed in here, so just hang with me for a few minutes while we run through all this together. I've got some things I'm trying to teach people, and I've got a certain contribution that I'm trying to make, because I want to help people with these messages. Now, has anyone else noticed that there is a lot of conflict and controversy surrounding President Biden's proposed student loan bailout program? Hundreds of thousands of college graduates are buried under mountains of debt that they cannot repay due to predatory lending practices that the Department of Education pretends not to notice. The overwhelming majority of working Americans, plus some seniors like myself, are in favor of student loan forgiveness. The only ones who aren't in favor are the top 1%, who are the only ones who stand to lose a portion of their profits as a result of this loan forgiveness. Any loan forgiveness. This weekly message will be an indictment then of the predatory money lenders, the usurers who have created our economic structure to best suit themselves. Well, God's people have something to say about that. Now, moving right along, subtitle here, Fighting the Damnable Scourge of Debt. Speaking of indictment, from the last paragraph, sometimes being a minister doesn't always involve things having to do with churches or even the concept of religion. Sometimes ministry is something that's not spiritual at all. Ministry is, to me at least, all about being a person focused exclusively on the needs of others, and sometimes those needs are of the more practical variety. It's about addressing our social issues while standing in unity with justice. That's why this blog and this channel are called the Social Gospel blog and channel, because that's what social gospel means. Standing in unity with justice, uniting to serve those in need. Save your religion for later. There are more pertinent things that must be tackled. That's what my inspiration is for writing this rather detailed posting today. It is my sincere hope that many hard-pressed individuals would be greatly assisted in their quest for financial independence. By that, by that I mean independence from the damnable scourge of debt, a trap that multitudes the world over are caught up in. And now, I want to share these 12 verses out of the book of Nehemiah to help make my point. We're going to do this next before we go any further. Now, in the Old Testament of the Bible, in the book of Nehemiah, God's views on debt and predatory lending practices are made abundantly clear. Allow me to quote the first 12 verses of chapter 5, beginning at verse 1, and I quote, "Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, 'We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain.' Others were saying, 'We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine.' Still others were saying, 'We have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards.'" Continuing at verse 5, "Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, and yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." When I heard their outcry, continuing at verse 6, Nehemiah wrote, "When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and the officials. I told them, 'You are charging your own people interest.' So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, 'As far as possible, We have bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people only to be sold back to us. And they kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. Continuing at verse 9. So I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses, and also the interest you are charging them. 1% of the money, the grain, new wine, and olive oil. Finishing up with verse 12, we will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Close quote. Okay, there's a lot in here, but I'm only going to go over the part that has to do with social injustice. In this case, a form of social injustice that I would call economic injustice or economic inequality, an inequality that is being enforced not by the military, but by Wall Street. Subtitle here, charging interest, based on what I've just read to you, is sin against God. As you just heard or viewed, charging interest is sinful in God's sight, particularly when people must go into debt in order to eat. It's the same as making money with more money or earning money without work. But it is written in the scriptures, if a man will not work, then he shall not eat. That's why making money with money, commonly known as usury, is evil. It conflicts with the Bible and it conflicts with God Himself. So, let's suppose we just did all that. If that were the case, we would then find the real cause of the default on loans of all types. The true cause is stagnant wages. Stagnant, I said. Being buried under a mountain of debt is not something that is confined to materialistic America. Debt is a global pandemic, and its root cause is the debt-based economic system we are all stuck living under, otherwise known as capitalism. Our current economic system is based on something called fractional reserve lending, which is where money is loaned into existence for little more than digital bookkeeping entries. If this is starting to read like some kind of a scam to you, that's because it is. No wonder so many people have become disenchanted with capitalism. So I am writing this week's message, or recording this week's message, pardon me, because I have been through this very thing myself. Being unable to repay a student loan is not the borrower's fault. Stagnant wages are to blame. Wages that are at about the same level as the mid to late 1970s. That's the real reason. The real reason you're unable to pay your student loans. That's why you can't pay them back. The deck has been stacked against you the whole time. And I think it's time people rise up and do something about it. But only this, no violence. No violence. There are other means. And sometimes I take it upon myself to become chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. That same committee. Yeah, that's right. But never mind that. Here are the first two ways to get out from under your student loan. And by saying get out from under, I mean there are two ways that you can walk away from your student loan and not repay it. And you would not be found guilty in any court of anything, either criminal or civil. Legally, there would be nothing they could do. So, the first of two ways to get out from under your student loan, and only two ways, there are only two ways, by the way, is that you can legally walk away from your student loan. The first is for younger workers, the other is for the older ones, of which I was one. For younger workers, the only way that you can legally walk away from a student loan is to get a job in another country and then become a citizen of that nation by renouncing your American citizenship. That's right. That first way for the younger workers is the only way you can do that without getting into trouble with the Department of Education and the Department of Internal Revenue Service will come along soon thereafter. Of course, to do that, you will need a passport and a work visa to whatever country that you might wish to emigrate to. There will also be a waiting period in your new country of choice before one can declare legal citizenship, and this varies from country to country. Where are good places to emigrate to? There are plenty of them, with much of South America and Western Europe, parts of coastal Mexico, nearly anywhere in Southeast Asia, or in Canada if you don't mind the cold weather. Those will be among your perennial favorites, your best choices as things stand today in October of 2022 as I'm recording this. October the 29th to be exact. There will be a waiting period. Oops, I said that one already. There are plenty of places to go. There is also a big demand for English teachers in mainland China, and you won't need a teaching degree either. I have never been to any of the above places except for Canada, so I can't vouch for any of those countries. You'll have to do your own research, and I would encourage you to do so. Now, the next subtitle, Strike Back at the Predatory Lenders if you can. What about older workers? Still stuck with old student loans that can't be repaid? Their first choice is the same as above, if they are able to do so. Some will consider immigration to be too impractical, especially those with families or with a mortgage to repay. Unless, of course, you simply walk away from the mortgage and all your other loans when you emigrate. Some would consider this to be unethical. That is true, but with desperate times usually calling for desperate measures, there is no law against doing this very thing. And, by the way, this happens all the time. Besides, since our capitalistic economic system is so predatory anyway, I see nothing wrong with giving them a taste of their own medicine once in a while. Just don't make a habit of it. Then you'll make them mad. Not good. Now, next subtitle, what about that second choice, Pastor? Tell us what it is, man. Well, the second choice are older workers who cannot repay their student loans because they can't find suitable work. And I was one of those people. The one-word answer is disability. But before you recoil at my response, please allow me the chance to point some things out. Age discrimination is an unfortunate fact of the American job market and American life. In numerous other cultures, globally speaking, their elders are held in the highest esteem, and they are viewed as sources of knowledge, experience, and wisdom. In short, older people get a lot more respect overseas than they do here in the United States. I had the misfortune myself of finding this out the hard way. 4 months after my 50th birthday, I had a stroke that was severe enough to take me out of the job market for 2 years before I was finally able to re-enter. The government, by the way, doesn't want you knowing all this stuff. Not if they can help it. After a while, as with myself, once again, my health started failing again, and I eventually wound up on disability. Once the process was completed, which took me about 2 years, I called the company that I was holding my old student loan and told them I had just been put on disability. And I explained my reasons for not being able to make a payment for over 5 years, which was true. Telling them my income had dropped by nearly 80%, which, again, can and does happen, and pleading with them for better terms. That's when I learned that people who become disabled do not have to repay the remainder of their student loans. And that's federal law. Only one is considered unable to work. Or, excuse me, once one is considered unable to work, the balance of that person's student loans are forgiven no matter how much they owe. Period. End of story. That's how I got walked away. That's how I got out from under my student loans. And I did this back in 2012. So that's been a ways back. Next subtitle, last subtitle here, rather. Shame is not required, nor should it ever be. My only mistake back then was that I could have filed for disability years before and hadn't realized I was eligible. So basically, if you're older than 50 years of age here in America and you lose your job and have no job prospects, you don't have to have a stroke to get disability, some other medical condition. Nearly everybody has one. Depression, for example. Clinical depression is easy to qualify for. To get your own disability, you might as well. Your plight exists because your government allowed it to develop through their own mismanagement and malfeasance in office. Y'all know people I'm talking about. Now that you're down and out, through no fault of your own, make the government help you get on your feet. There are ways of doing that. Or find a church that's willing to lend a helping hand. There is never any shame in asking for help. One more thing about disability, and that is the unfortunate happenstance of court convictions for various crimes, particularly for people of color and minorities. Court convictions, even for nonviolent offenses, can oftentimes be a barrier to employment, pardon me. In a worst case scenario, being a convicted felon can qualify some people for disability simply because they're felons who have languished behind bars, some of them for decades, making them too old to work or to be a threat. Sometimes this is for good reasons, such as medical, but not always, unfortunately. But if you're a middle-aged man or woman in their 50s, and especially if you're older than that, disability may be your best way out of your old student loans. Besides, you can still work part-time. You don't have to live on that little bit of money. So for now, that's all I have to say about all this. As you heard, some of this was based on personal experience, and I hope that by sharing that experience, this was helpful to some people. I sure hope this helps a few people retake control of their finances, and by extension, their lives. Everybody else enjoy their day. Please don't forget to give me a like, a share, and a subscribe just below the just below the picture there. And don't forget to have a look at my book page on Amazon. Amazon.com/author/Paul J. Bern. That's PAULJBERN. And I guess that's all for now. Everyone have a blessed rest of the day. And everyone, oh, one last thing. I want to thank you all for the privilege of your time. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. And so everybody, be blessed in Jesus' mighty name.